The first project today is to do a little maintenance on my Toro Powerlight snowblower. It's got a few issues. It's leaking gas from the carburetor, as you can see, and the primer button fell off, and it needs the scraper blade replaced. All a little small stuff, but I figure we'll tackle that. This snowblower was actually brought down to me by fellow YouTuber Baldwin587. He actually drove this all the way to Ohio from Maine, which is kind of cool. And I've been using this snowblower for about 4 years, and it's really never given me any trouble. It's like the perfect size compared to some of those bigger Ariens machines that I have. This thing gets into all the tight spots, so it's a really nice piece of equipment to have. Now, the problem with it, in terms of the gas leak, is that the carburetor has actually corroded, where the bowl sandwiches a rubber gasket between the bottom of the top of the bowl and the bottom of the carburetor body itself. That little mating surface has gotten very pitted, and so even with a new carburetor gasket on there, it still doesn't seal up properly. So I headed over to Amazon and I bought a tune-up kit for this machine, which is essentially a carburetor with all of the fuel and primer lines, and the primer comes with it, new gaskets and fuel line clamps, as well as they actually threw in a scraper blade as well, which if you don't know what the scraper blade is, it's this chunk of Delrin plastic that sort of runs along the ground as you push the snowblower, and this acts as your sacrificial piece so that the metal or the plastic body of the snowblower doesn't wear away rubbing against the cement. These things are almost comedically easy to take apart. There's just 2 screws right here that hold the whole back plate on, and then it's sort of just an interference fit down at the bottom. You can tell by the amount of oil residue all over this thing that it's been leaking gasoline for quite a while. I just haven't had time to fix it until now, because it does still run fine even with the fuel leak. So you can see now you just lift this plastic piece off, and there's the entire engine, basically. It's just a tiny little Tecumseh 2-stroke motor. You've got your little carburetor just bolted onto the side right there. So we'll just take that off and we'll go ahead and install our new carburetor kit. I'm glad the new carburetor kit came with all of the fuel lines and everything, because one thing I noticed a while ago is that this fuel line at some point in time was actually rubbing on the pull string to start the engine, and it's worn pretty far into it. I don't think it's leaking, but it's just, that's not good. Now, the snowblower might be comically easy to take apart, but the engine is not. In order to take the carburetor out, you have 2 T25 bolts right here and here, which hold the little snow deflector on. And then you've actually got 2 more T25 bolts, these little cap screws, back here, hidden kind of at a bizarre angle behind the fuel line, and your screwdriver will hit this guard if you try to reach them head on. I don't know why Tecumseh decided that this was the best idea. I've done a lot of these carburetor replacements on these little Tecumseh engines, and I always just replace these cap screws with normal bolts if they strip out or something, and I never have any issues. Tecumseh totally could have put just a normal, like, 10mm bolt back there instead of a T25. And so now we can take this little thing off the carburetor here. The purpose of this is that it acts as a deflector, and it stops the carburetor from icing up in the winter. I don't know if I can get this gasket off or not. It's not essential. We don't need it on the new carburetor. So I'm applying a little bit of leverage here with a pair of pliers in order to help loosen these bolts up. And that is working. You can sort of finesse the screwdriver back in here and then turn it with the pliers. And you can see that is loosening those screws up very well. Okay, so the carburetor is unbolted, and the next thing we're going to have to do in order to remove it is we want to take off, there's this very fine governor rod which runs underneath the flywheel here, and that governs the speed of the engine. But before we can tilt the carburetor enough in order to take the governor rod out of this butterfly valve linkage, we're going to have to undo the fuel line. So we'll remove the little spring clip here and just put it off to the side. And then carefully wiggle this fuel line off of here. And a little bit of gas is leaking out. That's not so bad. I'll just go ahead and put this off to the side. And now we can sort of lift the carburetor over and twist it like this in order to remove the little linkage. And you can see the little linkage now is just dangling there. And now we've got the old carburetor removed. Okay, one thing I'd like to do is just compare the old carburetor to the new carburetor to just make sure we got the right parts. It certainly looks about the same. I believe that this is the original Tecumseh carburetor. You can see it's entirely non-adjustable, just like the new one, which is fine. These snowblowers rarely need carburetor adjustment. Now, one thing we'll have to do is remove these little screws from the sides, and then there's a little bracket here which holds a spring. And we can go ahead and remove that, and we will transfer that to the new carburetor. And this is the return spring for the governor mechanism. Go ahead and remove the screw from the other side too. And we could reuse this gasket probably. It's coming off fairly well. But the kit actually came with a brand new gasket, so I'm just going to use that. One interesting thing, this little piece of metal here that holds the spring is actually how you change the speed the engine runs at. All you do is grab this with a pair of pliers and bend it forward and backwards, which changes how much tension is being placed on the spring, and thereby how much the spring is acting against the resistance of the governor, which is pulling on this little lever assembly here, which opens and closes the butterfly valve. It's really simple, but it seems like it works fine. So I have the whole carburetor sub-assembly put together here with the gasket and everything. I'm going to go ahead and bolt that onto the engine now. And these do not have to be that tight, just hand tight's fine. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the little snow shield back on. I apologize for the camera's auto brightness freaking out in the last couple of shots. I moved it to this side of the workpiece, so hopefully it doesn't do that anymore. This is a very good camera, but it sometimes has some little quirks, and I've never been able to figure out why. Okay, so now that we've got the carburetor installed, I'm going to go ahead and hook up all of the fuel lines and the primer line. Some of them need to be a little bit modified. I took the fuel valve off, and they give you this piece which is supposed to go between the fuel valve and the fuel tank. As I said before, I'm just going to connect this in here like this, I'm not going to bother with a fuel valve. I may actually take this off and switch it around so that the fuel filter is not rubbing up against the case of the engine. These fuel filters are like fairly fragile if you vibrate them a lot, and I don't really want this thing splitting in half and dumping gasoline everywhere. So I think I may do that first. This is what I was talking about before, where I said that the fuel line was rubbing on the pull string. So that's nice. I'm very glad that wasn't leaking. So I've gone ahead and connected the fuel filter to the fuel tank, just with a little piece of fuel line. And I'm going to go ahead and install the longer piece of fuel line between the fuel filter and the carburetor. Interesting note, the fuel tank of this thing is literally just cast into the decorative top shroud. It's just all one piece. It's not even a sub-assembly. They just mold it right in there. Next thing I'm going to do is install the primer button, which is given to you with way too much hose. So I'll just go ahead and feed the hose up through the top here. And you really don't need a whole lot of it, so I'll just go ahead and cut it down. So installing the primer is really straightforward. It looks like this, and there's these two little plastic clips on the back. I think at some point somebody had a different style primer in here. They sell one that looks very similar but attaches with two bolts through two holes, and somebody drilled some holes in there. But installing it's super easy. You just basically just place it in here and just push down, and it snaps into place like that. And there you go. The last thing I'm going to do before buttoning this all up is I'm going to change out this scraper blade. This scraper blade was also a little bit more worn out than I thought it was. It's actually started to wear the steel a little bit on the edges, which is not so great. And it started to wear this bolt off. So the scraper blade's really easy to change. You just get a flathead screwdriver and take it apart like this. There's 3 bolts, 1, 2, 3. And they're just basically holding plastic to plastic. It threads into plastic, so be careful that you don't break anything. Oh, no, I'm getting it with the pliers. Check that out. And it just kind of pushes down like this and pops right off. There's not much to it. Yeah, I think this one was due. It's pretty worn down. Here's what the new one looks like for comparison. Install the new scraper blade's really easy. It literally just hooks on like this. And you gotta put the 3 screws back in, obviously. Speaking of those, I'm gonna go see if I can find some that aren't quite so worn out. I went and had a look through some of my screws, and I found these guys, which look like exactly the same thing. Alright, that looks good to me. The only thing that's left is to put this plastic cover back on. Alright, it's all back together now, and I don't see any leaks, so let's see if it'll start. And now for something completely different. This is a Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC, VT320 serial data terminal. Now, I don't do a lot of videos about computer equipment, especially vintage computer equipment, but little do you know, I actually do a lot of vintage computer repair, restoration, and just general hobby type stuff. And I've actually been tasked A good friend of mine purchased this deck terminal for a whopping $9.99 at an industrial surplus store, and has tasked me with getting it running. Now, it doesn't look that bad to me. The only thing I can see right off the bat is that the cord right here has been damaged in some way. I suspect it's been run over by a forklift. That's what it looks like. And it's just absolutely filthy. Now, a little brief word on serial terminals. For those of you who don't know what a serial or dumb terminal is, basically it is a serial interface device. So you have a display and you have a keyboard, and it is exclusively a terminal for communicating over serial protocols. So RS-232, RS-485, whatever. These were very commonly used in schools, businesses, libraries, anywhere where they needed to have a lot of people on one computer. And by computer, I mean like an IBM mainframe in the basement. You know, a big central processor, and everybody can use that computer over the serial data interface. So to start with, I'm just going to take some of this stuff off. At the industrial surplus store, they stick these little things on there. So I'll just go ahead and remove that with a little screwdriver here. This little sticky thing, double-sided tape, so they could put the label on. And there's a lot of other stickers on here too, which I'll probably remove with some lighter fluid or maybe even some gasoline. I apologize for all the truck noise. They're cleaning up a lot of fallen trees in my area right now. We get a big storm. Let's get these labels off here and then try to get some of the dust off, I think. Next, I'm going to go ahead and just wipe down everything, just so I don't get so dirty when I'm working on it. That's some Sprayway ammonia-free glass cleaner, by the way. I like it because it cleans super well, but it doesn't smell bad. I don't know about you guys, I really don't like the smell of ammonia, so I'm not trying to get this perfect, I'm just trying to wipe off a majority of the filth. So the glass cleaner really wasn't cutting it. This thing is so dirty, so I had to switch over to a diluted mixture of Simple Green and water, which seems to be cutting through the crud a lot better on this thing. I suspect, like most of these serial terminals that were in use much later than the general population, that it was in a factory or a warehouse of some kind. Factories, warehouses, and the industrial sector hung on to these things way longer than, you know, the general populace did, just because their systems were probably pretty antiquated when these were put into use, and they didn't change much over the years, so they had no incentive to be with the times. But man, is this thing dirty. I don't know what sort of a warehouse or factory it was in, but got a lot of dirt on it. Now onto this horrible keyboard. Now I'm not trying to make this keyboard look like new. I just want to be able to type on it without getting my fingers covered in filth, basically. Which might actually be more of a task than I initially thought. This thing is very dirty. I'm not overly concerned about getting a little moisture on it. I'm not planning to turn this thing on for quite a while yet, so if any small amount of moisture does get into the keyboard, it will evaporate by the time I'm actually ready to use the thing. Got a stuck key right here, I just noticed. Doesn't look that bad, actually. I'm not sure what was causing that to be stuck down. As a wise man once said, it's good enough for the girls I go out with. Alright, now that I don't mind touching it, let's see if we can do something about that cable. I'm going to lay down a little piece of old microfiber cloth so that I don't scratch the screen when I do this. And then we can start pulling this thing apart. It's got some screws on the bottom here, which I'll go ahead and get off of there. Now, I'm not overly concerned about getting electrocuted by this CRT because this piece of equipment has not been powered on. In the entire time the person who I got it from has owned it, and he's owned it for a couple of years. So, let me just see if I can figure out how to get this off of here. Ooh, there we go. That sounded like it broke, but it didn't, so we're in business. So let me just tilt this back like this, and we can see where the power cable is going in, and then this is right here is actually our power supply board. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this ground lug here, this other ground lug here. And then it looks to me like this just slides out. There might be a little snap clip right here that retains the power supply board. But it looks like this just slides up and out of here. So I can get this to go. Yeah. Problem is, the retaining clip that's very aggressive. There we go. So it looks like that's our power supply right here. There's our power cord. Oh, I got a main plug over here I didn't see. Just pull that. There we go. Now I can pull the main power connector. Oh, and there's the on-off switch, but I'm just going to leave that connected. So here is where our power cord goes in. And interestingly enough, the power switch is actually a hard power switch. It's actually turning the main power input wires on and off. So I'm probably just going to cut the cord right here and splice a new cord in through this gland and just put some wire nuts or crimp connectors on there, because I don't feel like rewiring that whole switch assembly. So I was going to use this black cable to replace the one that was already on there. However, the physical size of this is too big to fit through this little strain relief collar, and I don't want to drill that out. So instead, I went ahead and rummaged around in my stash, and I actually found this really nice white cable, which should hopefully match the aesthetic of this thing a little better, and it will fit through this. So let me go ahead and wire this up. Now, to connect this cord on here, I will be using some wire nuts. And you may ask, why are you using wire nuts? Why not soldering or crimp connectors or something like that? Well, the reason is I don't know if this thing works or not. And because of that, I don't want to solder a cord on it because this is a nice cord. And if this doesn't work, I will be keeping the cord. Add our little strain relief guy on here. Okay. Nice. Alright, let's get this thing buttoned back up again and see if it works. One last thing I noticed that was bothering my OCD was these little rubber feet here have slid down. So I just need to move them back up again and stick them back down. I presume this is from sliding the terminal around on a hard surface. Also, I don't know why everybody decides that now's the best time to mow the lawn as soon as I turn the camera on. It happens every time. Alright, so there's that. Here is this. This is keyboard. Yeah, the keyboard has a little pop-out feet too, which is kind of cool. Go like that. If you want to have it raised up for typing convenience. I'm just going to keep it down like this. Go ahead and plug the keyboard in over here. I'll go get some power and let's give this thing a try. Alright, moment of truth. Let's see if any smoke comes out. Oh, keyboard blinked. It's a good sign. Hey, we have a display. I don't know if you can see that. It says VT320 keyboard error number 4. I don't know what that means. Oh, interesting. Setup directory. So it is actually functioning. Display, general. Oh, enter. VT320 mode. User defined keys unlocked. Numeric keypad. No new line. Next to directory. COM keyboard printer. Online, local, online. COM. 8 bits, 1 stop bit, 64 XOFF. It's only limited transmit. So yeah, this thing seems like it's working perfectly fine. That's awesome. I don't actually have anything right now to plug this into to test it, but that's super cool. So some of these have the amber display, which is kind of cool, but I've always been partial to the beautiful green phosphor screen. I don't know if you can see this. I just love the look of it. The entire thing, honestly, is a pretty beautiful piece of hardware. Digital Equipment Corporation really had some nice designs. So this is my phone. It's an iPhone 6S. I bought this phone brand new in 2015, and it's been a really great piece of technology. I absolutely love it. However, recently I've been having an issue with the speaker. It just sounds really, really bad. I'm gonna see if I can demonstrate it here with some royalty-free music. I don't know if you can hear that, but the speaker sounds like it's blown. It's really, really buzzy, and especially when you're making speakerphone calls, which I do all the time, the other person is practically unintelligible sometimes. So I'm gonna try to repair it. Luckily, I actually have another iPhone 6S just laying around. Unfortunately, this one has a bad logic board, so it just doesn't work at all. See, I'm trying to turn it on. It doesn't work. However, it's in really good condition otherwise, and I bet the speaker in this one works fine. So the story behind this phone is that I actually used to use this one for a little while because I broke the screen on this one being an idiot, and somebody had given me this one that also had a broken screen, but the screen was less broken on this one than it was on this one at the time. And I ended up fixing this phone first and started using it again because it has more storage. This one has 128 gigs, and I think this one's only 64 gigs or so. However, I decided to fix this one as well and then sell it, and I put a really, really cheap screen on this phone. Word of advice, don't do that. Buy the screen like this one has, which is like, I don't know, $150, instead of buying one of those ones that they sell on eBay for like 14 bucks. So what ended up happening is that really cheap screen, the backlight driver malfunctioned, and it blew one of the chips on the logic board. So this phone, in theory, actually does work, but the screen doesn't work. So even though the brain may be alive, you can't actually see anything on the display. However, I seem to recall that the speaker on this phone did work, and I don't think it sounded distorted, although admittedly, I haven't used this phone in probably 3 years. So taking apart one of these iPhones is really, really easy. You really only need 2 tools. One of them is one of these weird Apple pentalobe screwdrivers. It kind of looks like a Torx bit, but it's actually like a star shape. Let me see if the camera will focus in on this. Oops, wrong way around. But as you can see, that's what the actual driver looks like. And there are 2 of those screws that are located right here, like on either side of the charging connector. I've actually already taken them out on this phone just to save some time. And then all you've got to do after that is get a suction cup here and stick it onto the screen. And you'll just sort of lift the screen up ever so slightly. It doesn't really require much force at all. You just sort of pull on it, and the screen will start to lift up down here. And you can literally just use your fingernail if you want to, or a guitar pick. But I actually have one of the fancy spudgers to remove the screen. So you just lift it up here and you jam the spudger in there and just kind of pry a little bit. It doesn't really take that much force. And the screen just sort of pops off like this. Compared to some newer cell phones that are all held together with glue and they require heat treatment and fancy tools to, you know, pull the screen off, and the internals are really difficult to disassemble. These older iPhones are impressively easy to fix. So as you can see, the screen sort of just flips forward like that. Now, if I was replacing the screen, there would be some other parts over here, some little shields and things, which I would remove, but I'm actually not doing that. I'd actually already taken that off when I was troubleshooting this phone originally to figure out why it wouldn't work. So I'm just going to remove the little cables that hold the screen on, or that connect the screen to the logic board. I'm just going to stick the screen somewhere else. So the speaker is actually this thing, this big black blob right here. I think I'm going to move the camera down a little bit further so you can get a better look at what I'm doing. Okay, so the first thing I did was disconnect the battery. even though I'm pretty sure that this battery is totally dead. I don't want any surprises. The next thing I'm going to do is take this ribbon cable here off. This is actually the cable for the charging port at the bottom, and I think maybe also the headphone connector. Not 100% sure, but I'm going to go ahead and pop this off too. And I noticed when unplugging the battery, see this like weird residue right here? I'm wondering if possibly this phone had some liquid damage that I didn't even know about. And that might have been another reason why the logic board failed from that cheap screen. Not sure. It looks like there's only 2 screws holding the speaker assembly in. It looks like there's one here and one there. I can't tell if this is a screw hole and there's a screw missing, or possibly this is just there. I'm not really sure what this little hole is. We're gonna have to see when I open up the other phone if there's actually a screw here. So after some more messing around, I took the haptic feedback motor out, which was not actually necessary. I discovered there was another screw right here that was hiding underneath a piece of tape. So I'm gonna go ahead and take that screw out, and then the whole speaker just falls right out of the phone basically. It's interesting to me how the speaker is actually flat, and it's inside this metal area. And then the sound is just sort of funneled down this plastic part and out the bottom of the phone. It's also kind of neat how the speaker is actually connected to the logic board with this flat ribbon cable that just has 2 little contact pads on it. And the speaker just has these 2 little pads right there as well. Okay, I guess it's time to crack open Old Reliable. Here's those 2 pentalobe screws I was mentioning before that you remove on the bottom. Press that on there like this. I apologize for my weird hand positions. It's kind of difficult to do this working around a tripod. And then very gently lift the screen up. I'm just going to lay it down like this. I'm not going to remove the screen, although I think that you're supposed to. Alright, I'm just going to gently spudger the speaker out. And sort of tilt it up and away. They say, according to a tutorial I looked up, you're supposed to remove this very, very fine antenna ribbon that's in here. But I'm not going to do that because I don't want to break it. And this is way easier to just slide the other one in. Being very careful to make sure I don't crush any of those really fine antenna wires that are behind this speaker. You'd know if you had one smashed because the speaker wouldn't fit flush with the board. It would be sort of sticking up, but this speaker is fitting really flush, so I think that's good. Okay, my camera just decided to shut off for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why it did that, but it kind of freaked me out there for a second. I always feel like I have really, really steady hands until I film a YouTube video, and then for some reason my hands always seem to get shaky right when I'm trying to concentrate. It's really annoying. And this guy is a little bit not quite perfectly seated, this little antenna, but I think that's because the adhesive on this other speaker just isn't that great. So I'm going to put the phone back together, and hopefully the screen will just hold this down. If it doesn't, I'll stick a little square double-sided tape in there, but I really don't think it's going to cause that much of a problem. At least I sure hope not. Another problem, as I think I mentioned earlier, is working around the camera and watching myself work through the viewfinder is really difficult. I have major respect for people like Louis Rossmann who do this all day, every day, and film all of it. Alright, so that's all put back together. So I'm going to go ahead and carefully lay the screen back down on this guy here. And you start from the top like this, and you just slowly work your way along until it all just pops back down. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on here and make sure that the speaker works before putting those 2 final screws in. Alright, that's awesome. The sound is so much clearer than this speaker was. I'm convinced that this speaker was blown because this speaker from the white phone isn't buzzing at all when the bass hits in this song, which is really good. And I went and tested it with some other not royalty-free music, and it sounds much, much better. So that's really cool. Let's go ahead and put the 2 little screws back in the bottom, and I think it'll be fixed. Okay, I found another royalty-free song that you can really hear that the speaker works perfectly now. It's got a really nice bass hit to it, so... I think that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys liked this video, by the way. Sort of a bunch of different projects all in one video. I'm gonna try to do this pretty regularly from now on, just because I have a lot of projects that don't seem to really constitute having their own full video, but it's kind of cool to just take a little, I don't know, couple minute clips and edit them all together and just show you guys what I've been working on, because I work on a whole variety of different things. I think a lot of people think this is just a small engine channel, but really I work on practically anything from electronics like this to cars to computer equipment to all kinds of stuff. So I'll start trying to bring you guys along for the ride a little bit more often, and I think I'm gonna go charge my phone as well, because it looks like it's about to run out of battery. Anyway, stay safe out there. I know the world is a little bit uncertain right now, but yeah, I'm doing well, and I hope you guys all are as well. Thanks for watching.